There was a cottage, and living in this cottage was a woman and her 3 children. One night, when it was late and the children were fast asleep, the woman was just getting herself ready to go to bed when suddenly there came a knock on her door. This was strange. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she called out, "Who is knocking on my door?" And a voice replied, "I am the witch of one horn." Curious, the woman went to the door, opened it, and standing there was a woman with a horn coming straight out of her forehead. This horned woman pushed away into the cottage, sat down, and took out a sack. It was a sack of wool. She began to comb the wool, to card it, to make it ready for spinning. Then there came a second knock on the door. Again, the woman called out, "Who is knocking on my door?" And a voice replied, "I am the witch of 2 horns." She went to the door, opened it, and standing there was a woman, this time with 2 horns coming out of her head. She pushed her way in, sat down next to the first, and took out a spinning wheel. The wool that the first witch combed, the second witch spun, and then came a third knock on the door. Again, the woman called out, "Who is knocking on my door?" And a voice replied, "I am the witch of 3 horns." And sure enough, when she opened the door, there was a woman with 3 horns. She pushed herself in, sat down by the first 2, and took out a loom. The wool the first witch combed, the second witch spun, and the third witch began to weave into cloth. Now, as the witches were working away, the woman noticed something. Heard all this noise, all this commotion, all this barging in. The children hadn't woken up. They hadn't even stirred. She went to go and check on them, and she found she couldn't move. She stood there, still as a statue, silent as the grave. Her jaw seemed to be sealed shut. The witches worked away, and at last, one of them looked up and said, "Woman, we're thirsty. Go get us a cup of tea." Now, as soon as the witches spoke, the woman found she was able to move again. So she looked around for a bucket, for a pail, for something she could use to fetch water, but she could find none. The witches saw this and they began to laugh. "In a sieve. Fetch the water in a sieve." So the woman picked up a sieve, went outside to the well, dipped it in the water, but well, it was a sieve. The water just fell straight through. She collapsed by the side of the well and began to weep in terror and in frustration because her 3 children were still inside, and whatever the witches were planning, she was certain it wasn't going to be anything good. And then, just as one of her tears fell into the water of the well, a voice called out, and the voice said, "Patch the sieve with clay and with moss." Now, the woman knew that wells, they sometimes have something magical to them, so she did as it said. She picked up her sieve, she gathered clay from the ground, moss from the side of the well, used it to patch her sieve, and sure enough, it now held water. But just as she was about to turn, the well called to her again. "I'm not done helping you yet. Go to your house, go to the north corner, call out 3 times that the mountain of the Fenian women is on fire." So she did as the well said. She took her sieve of water, walked around her house to the north corner, and called out, "The mountain of the Fenian women is on fire. The mountain of the Fenian women, it's on fire. The mountain of the Fenian women is on fire!" And as soon as the witches heard, they sprang up and ran towards the north, for that mountain was their home. The woman, she ran back inside and she tried to wake up her children, but though she shook them and shook them, they wouldn't wake. She ran back to the well and called, well, how do I break the spell? And the well told her. First, she would need to take the water in the sieve and wash her children's feet with it. Then scatter the dirty water all around the clay path that led to her home. Next, she would need to find a rowan tree, take its branches and use them to bar shut her door. And lastly, she would need to take that cloth the witches had been making, place it half in, half out of a chest, close the lid and lock it tight. But she would need to hurry because the witches would be back. So she ran to do as the well said. She took the sieve of water, she washed the children's feet, she flung the water all around the path. Next, she looked for a rowan tree. One grew not too far from her house. She ran to it. She tore the branches off with her bare hands, brought them to her house, barred her door. And lastly, she picked up the cloth the witches had been making. Now, when she picked it up, it felt strange. It felt heavy where it should feel light. It felt cold where it should feel warm, but she placed it half in, half out of her chest, closed the lid and locked it tight with an iron padlock. And she was only just in time, because the witches had returned. They were angry that the woman had tried to trick them. So the first witch called to the path, "Water and clay! Water and clay, open my way! Water and clay!" But the path just called out, "I can't. The water's been scattered." The second witch, she called to the door, "Wood of tree! Wood of tree, open for me, you wood of tree!" But the door just called back, "I can't. I've been barred." The last witch, she called to the cloth. She called, "Woven and spun. Woven and spun, make the locks undone, you woven and spun." But the cloth called back, "I'm stuck. I can't move." And just as the cloth called out, the sun began to rise. And when the light of the sun fell on the skin of the witches, they melted into nothing but morning mist. And the children woke up. They called for their mother. They'd had strange and terrible dreams. The woman, she gathered her children close to her. She comforted them. But she didn't tell them about what had happened. Not for many years, not until her oldest daughter was old enough to understand such things. Only then did she tell her about the night of the horned women. And she gave her the cloth the witches had left behind. Now when that daughter was grown and she had children of her own, she told her daughter and gave her the cloth. That daughter told her daughter and gave her the cloth, and that daughter told her daughter, and that daughter told her daughter. And the story got passed on, mother to daughter, for 500 years. And now it's been passed on to you.